Forever. Dog.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes. Movies, movies, movies. To quote Paul Mescal in Hamnet, movies, movies, movies. I cannot wait to talk about the movie Scream 7, which I saw bright and early last Friday morning at the Universal AMC at City Walk. I had a balcony seat. I also had a classic balcony seat moment because what sounded like a fight, at the very least a tiff, broke out in the what do we call them? The orchestra seats below. And so everyone in the balcony, myself included, was stuck getting up and sort of peering over the edge. Whoa, huh? You hear that? What's going on? Is there a fight down there? It sure sounded like there was. What happened was there were really I think starting around the Nicole Kidman promo, there were audible sounds of a baby or a young toddler sort of fussing, like a fussy baby. And it wasn't this baby wasn't like bawling its eyes out, but it was definitely fussing every minute. Once a minute, there was fuss. So somebody brought a baby to Scream 7, is what I'm saying. Somebody brought their baby to Scream 7. And to a degree, I sympathize with this. To a degree. I started bringing my son Sandy to movies at a very young age. But I followed two simple rules in doing that. First, I didn't take him to movies on opening day when he was really young. I tried to find movies that I thought would be poorly attended. I remember taking him to what must have been week 10 screening of Barbie, a week 10 weekday afternoon screening of Barbie when he was 2 years old, almost 2 years old. And sure enough, we had that entire theater to ourselves. We had that full theater to ourselves, the only two people in that theater. And we ended up sitting in like 6 different rows because he's getting up and moving around. It was a blast. I loved it. And it was to nobody else's expense. That's rule 1. Rule 2, if we were not the only people in the theater, even if there was just one other person in the theater, I had a 2 strikes then we're out policy. I'll give you one outburst. I'll give you one little fuss. But if we get to 2 noticeable, distracting outbursts, it's just not our day. It's not our day at this particular movie. Let's go do something else. Let's go to a playground. And this is not a punishment. It's not your fault. It's not your fault your dad's a ruthless movie dog. It's not your fault that your dad thought it'd be a good idea to take a 3-year-old to a public screening of the Castle in the Sky remaster. You're not in trouble. Let's go to a playground. And I know that there are people out there who say, no movies before the age of 5 or whatever arbitrary age they choose. No screens. Don't even say the word screen in the presence of a 2-year-old. It'll give them ideas. And I certainly agree that there is such a thing as excessive screen time for children. And I certainly agree that 3-year-olds shouldn't be doom scrolling YouTube. And that the majority of their time should be occupied with more tactile experiences, books and toys and playgrounds and talking and interacting. But who says screen time has to be passive? You can participate with your child in the screen time. You can make it active. Screen time doesn't just mean unboxing videos on YouTube. The screen is also Miyazaki and The Last Unicorn and the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated series. You can have active, valuable screen time in a way that doesn't seem any different to me than, oh, play Mozart for your baby. Play your baby Mozart. That seems to be a universally agreed upon thing to do. That's positive to do for a baby or toddler. How is it any different than me showing him a Miyazaki movie? It's the same thing. It's a visitation from the divine. It's not supposed to fully make sense yet. Doesn't fully make sense to me. I'm 43. I still find new things to discover in a Miyazaki movie. The important thing is it's about awakening something you don't even have a name for yet. It's about kickstarting an engine. It's a dream vision. I'm also always worried that I'm wrong as a parent. There's that constant fear as well, that I have no idea what I'm talking about. Particularly with something that I care about, like the movies. There's always the possibility that I'm just rationalizing a decision for my own benefit. And I'm sure there have been times when that is the case. A couple weeks ago, I did rush my son out of an indoor playground so we could catch a 2 p.m. screening of Arco. That was certainly more my decision than his. But to be fair, we had been at that indoor playground for about 2 hours. And I had heard really good things about Arco. It was good. It was really good. I liked Arco. But I do wonder, am I right about this, or am I just rationalizing? Maybe the screen time extremists are right and I'm wrong. Maybe. But then, just this past weekend, 2 things happened that, in my opinion, proved the value of strategic, intentional screen time for kids. Or if not strategic, that sounds, I don't know. That sounds too strategic. Intentional, meaningful screen time. Meaningful. Number one, I took my now 4.5-year-old son to the Academy Museum, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Museum, because they currently have a Ponyo exhibit, the Miyazaki film Ponyo. He's a big Ponyo fan. And they have a big Jaws exhibit going on. And no, I have not let him watch Jaws, not yet. But oh, he loves sharks. Oh, he loves great whites and megalodons and all the other sharks. In classic 4.5-year-old fashion, he knows the names of like 6 different types of prehistoric extinct sharks beyond just the megalodon. So this was a clear win-win. Ponyo, sharks, can't miss. Can't miss. And in the Ponyo exhibit, they had original posters from every Miyazaki movie, including one of my personal favorites, Porco Rosso. Porco Rosso. The pig aviator. Porco Rosso. And so I asked my son, after having taken probably about 50 pictures of him. I said, son, would you mind taking one pic of dear old Dad in front of this Porco Rosso poster? It would mean ever so much to me. And so my son takes my camera and he lines up the shot. The camera phone. I don't have a freaking camera around my neck in the Academy Museum. It's a camera phone. He takes this camera phone, he lines up the shot, and he goes, click. One push of the button. He's not going, okay, let's do another one. Let's do that. No, one click. Confident. I just got to show you this picture. If you're watching on YouTube right now, I'm going to put this picture up. Look at this shot. Look at this shot. Look at the low angle framing on this shot. I'd like to see one of these kids who never gets any screen time frame a shot like this. Let's see your hotshot kid with their zero screen time captured this elegant of a composition with one shot. One shot. First shot, best shot. He even captured this cool shadow on the wall. Do you see that? This cool shadow that makes it look like I'm a xenomorph wearing a Venetian plague mask. My shadow self. That's number one. Number two, the other thing that happened. After we've seen the exhibits, we hit the gift shop. We pick up a little Jaws toy and a children's picture book about Steven Spielberg. And later that night, we're reading the Spielberg book together. And I will say, shout out to whatever hardcore cinephile illustrated this book, because this is very much a children's book. This is like one of the golden, what are they called? The little golden books. You know the type, like the pokey little puppy. It's like that style of book. This is a children's book. But there is an illustration in this book of Spielberg on the Close Encounters of the Third Kind set, and he's wearing a sorcerer t-shirt. William Friedkin's Sorcerer in this book that is for like 3 and 4 year olds. And it's based on an actual photo. There's a famous photo of Spielberg wearing this sorcerer shirt. But I loved that little inclusion. And there's also later on there's a page that is just sort of a collage of Spielberg characters. And this illustrator, among Indiana Jones and Ian Malcolm and E.T. and Jaws and all the rest of the classic characters, this illustrator included John Belushi from 1941. Incredible. So props to the illustrator of this little golden Spielberg book. But what my son was most interested in this book, besides the Jurassic Park page, that was a big winner too, but besides the Jurassic Park page, he was most interested, of course, in E.T. E.T. the extraterrestrial. And I realized in his kind of wonder at E.T., I don't think he knew about E.T. I don't think he had ever come across E.T. in the wild before this. And so I said, if you want, I could just throw on E.T. right now. It's a whole movie. We could just watch E.T. right now, start to finish. What do you say? And he said, okay. All right, let's do it. So we watched E.T. And if you listen to Weekend at Bergman's, our Patreon-only bonus show, if you listen to our 1980s season, I love E.T. I frickin' love this movie. This sublime tone poem. Not just about the beauty and the wonder of childhood, as is often pointed out, but also about the lies and corruption of adulthood and the challenges of maintaining the one while passing irrevocably into the other. I'll believe in you all my life. One of the great lines in movie history. And so you better believe, my fellow movie dogs, I was on cloud frickin' 9 watching E.T. with my kid for the first time. I was also fully prepared for E.T. to be a little too soon. A little too soon for a 4.5-year-old. A little too slow, maybe. A little too subtle in its charms. But damn it, this frickin' Spielberg guy. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing in ways that I didn't even realize until I watched it with my kid. The pacing is actually perfect. Because you realize that with a kid, and I've seen this with shows before, with movies before, too much too soon is just as bad as not enough too slow. Too much too soon is just as bad as not enough too slow. And Spielberg finds that perfect balance in the middle of those two things. Because early on, more so than any other time I've watched E.T., I was really worried that he wasn't showing E.T. fast enough for a 4-year-old. And I'm sitting there going, come on, Steven. Come on, show the fucking E.T. The clock is ticking. Show the fucking E.T., Steven. But then I look down, and Sandy, my son, is on the edge of his frickin' seat. He is hanging on every shot. E.T.'s hand on the edge of the woodshed. When you hear E.T. disappear into the woods. E.T. coming up the stairs off screen. It's done so perfectly. It just draws you in. My son is experiencing anticipation. A thing that he doesn't usually experience in movies that are made for kids, for him. He's experiencing anticipation and he likes it. I can see him liking it. He's physically responding to this narrative device, this cinematic device. And 4-year-olds don't like waiting for things. They want it now. And so I'm asking myself, why is he being so patient? Why is he hanging on every move? It's because he's in the presence of a master. Because he's not watching passively. He's watching actively. Because there is something to actively pay attention to here. There is a rhythm to lock into. And then, when the government goons show up for the first time in the woods, and it's just headlights. It's literally just headlights. I think there's a little sting on the soundtrack, but it's just headlights and this sting on the soundtrack. It's disconnected images. My son sits up and he looks at me and he goes, "Bad guys." Headlights, a little sting, bad guys. And that is visual literacy. That is visual literacy. And I think, and again, I understand there are legitimate concerns, obviously, about the type of screen exposure that kids get, about the amount of it. I totally get that. But in the midst of all that, I think we should celebrate and encourage visual literacy, cinematic literacy, in the way that we celebrate saying your first word, reading your first book, other forms of literacy. I was so proud watching him watch E.T. I was so proud. He also came up with a great bit while we were watching E.T. And I think it started out accidentally. He referred to E.T. as R2-D2, I think because they're shaped in a similar way. I think it was that first wide shot in the forest where you see E.T. from a distance. And my son goes, R2-D2. And I said, and this is my mistake, I said, no, that's E.T. And at that point, it was game on. When I have corrected him, he gets that little twinkle in his eye and he goes, I've stumbled upon something here. And so for the rest of the movie, he was, on the one hand, very affected by what he was seeing. It's not like this was some sort of little, I don't know, this little game didn't undermine the experience of E.T. It didn't become a joke. He was still very emotionally affected by what he was seeing. When E.T. gets sick, that was tough. That was very tough. He felt that. He responded to that. But he also couldn't give up on this funny bit that he had stumbled upon, calling E.T. R2-D2 and watching my reaction. And it all came together when E.T. comes back to life and his heart starts glowing inside that iron lung looking machine that they stick him in. His heart starts glowing red. And Sandy goes, oh! And I ask him, what happened? And he goes, R2-D2's alive! That was maybe the thing that I was most proud of all. That his authentic emotional response to that moment didn't undermine his commitment to the bit, and vice versa. That being said, I'm not sure if it was the best idea to bring a baby to an opening day screening of Scream 7. Because after this baby had made 4 or 5 loud, cranky noises with increasing frequency during the first 10 minutes of the movie, while we're all just trying to watch Ghostface slash up these young lovers in an Airbnb, a novelty Airbnb based on Scream. Well, we're all just trying to do that with our Friday afternoon. This baby's having what is quickly becoming a sort of fit. And then that's when we in the balcony heard this low level argument break out. But it quickly morphed into a louder argument, and then someone very loudly, so that everyone could hear, said, "And that's why you're a fucking asshole." And after that, we didn't hear the baby anymore. And based solely on the chain of events that we heard, it almost seemed like this person was speaking to the baby, and that the baby was stunned into silence after that. But more likely, they were addressing the parent of the baby, who decided that was their cue to leave. Probably wasn't the best idea to bring a baby to an opening day screening of Scream 7. But we do get comfortable with horror movie franchises over time. Ghostface and Freddy and Jason and Art the Clown, they become cartoon characters in the pop culture consciousness. Freddy Krueger had a 900 number. He was all over the toy aisle. lunch boxes, backpacks. I remember in, what was it? I think like first grade, a kid with a Freddy Krueger something t-shirt backpack. And I was still in that early phase of life where I loved the concept of movies, but I wasn't allowed to see basically any of them. And so I was desperate for any piece of information that I could get about any movie. And I remember asking this kid, did you see this Freddy Krueger movie? Yeah, I saw it. And this was either the second or the third? I think the third one. Dream Warriors, it must have been, based on what he told me next. Because I said, well, what's happens in the movie? What's it all about? And he goes, oh, you'd love it. This guy's veins get pulled out of his body. And I said, what the fuck? His veins get pulled out of his body? I didn't know. I thought Freddy Krueger was like Mickey Mouse. I just saw him on all the backpacks and lunchboxes and t-shirts. I didn't know he was a serial child killer who got burned to death by his parents' victims. I thought he was Mickey Mouse. There was a toy called the Freddy Krueger Fright Squirter. The Freddy Krueger Fright Squirter. It was like a water gun that spit water out of Freddy's mouth. They sold them at Toys R Us. Kids could run around the backyard in the 90s and have Freddy Krueger spit on each other with Freddy Krueger. And that's why later in life, even now, anytime, any day of the week, it is always such a thrill, such a visceral thrill to revisit the first installment of a long-running horror franchise. It's one of my favorite things to do. Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play. Before the merchandising and the pop culture trickle-down transformed its iconography into something gentler and lighter and more commodifiable. That first kill in Nightmare on Elm Street, oh my God. Harrowing. Terrifying. When Tina gets tossed against the walls and the ceiling and there's blood spraying everywhere indiscriminately. And she's screaming this horrible scream. It's haunting. It's haunting. Never fails to shock me and to scare me. Or in Child's Play when they manage to trap Chucky in the fireplace. And he's shaking the screen and he just flies into this unbelievable rage. This doll just shaking the screen and going, ah! And they burn him alive. It's haunting in a way that no amount of Chucky Funko Pops could ever undermine. In the closing credits of the first Scream movie, 1996's Scream, because that's what we're here to talk about today, is Scream. In the closing credits of the first Scream movie, there is a very interesting credit, or I guess an anti-credit. And I'm going to show it to you here on screen, again, if you're watching this. And I hope that you are. But it's fine if you're not. You'll see there's a list of special thanks, very, very standard. City of Healdsburg, city in California, the Santa Rosa Doubletree Hotel, etc., etc. And then there's this line. No thanks whatsoever to the Santa Rosa City School District Governing Board. What the hell is the Santa Rosa City School District Governing Board, and what did it do to Wes Craven? This refers to a dispute that arose during pre-production on Scream. After the Santa Rosa City School District in Northern California had given Wes Craven permission to shoot there, to shoot at one of their schools. I think it was just Santa Rosa High School. They gave him permission. They scouted the location. They storyboarded the location. They were all ready to go. And then, with very little notice, Santa Rosa revoked that permission. Said, sorry, changed our minds. Craven was mad. He threatened to sue. And it all came to a head at a school board meeting on April 16th, 1996. Apparently, one of the board members was, quote, appalled at the script for Scream, which featured disemboweled teenagers and four-letter words. This school board member argued that the financial benefit to the school, which was about $30,000 they were going to get paid for being a location in Scream, was not worth endorsing such, quote, gratuitous gore. However, after the board was advised that canceling the contract on that basis alone might constitute a First Amendment violation and leave them open to litigation, they came up with a different reason to cancel, saying that it would be too disruptive to school operations. Sorry, this is too disruptive to school operations. So Craven said, okay, and he revised the shooting schedule to just 4 days. I think it was originally like 8 or 10. He revised it to just 4 days to minimize disruption to school operations. But the board rejected him again, claiming that these 4 days created a scheduling conflict with a local theater group. We wish we could. Oh, we wish we could. Those 4 days? Oh, I wish. But those 4 days are going to create a conflict with a local theater group. A few weeks later, this same school and school district gave Ron Howard approval for an 8-day shoot for his movie Inventing the Abbotts. Wes Craven was pissed off. Pissed off. You give me the runaround, make up these bullshit excuses, and then just give Ron Howard 8 days for Inventing the Abbotts? I'm directing fucking Scream here. I'm directing Scream. And because they had already spent all this time storyboarding it and blocking it and planning it out at this location, what they ended up doing was recreating an identical classroom and principal's office on an old car dealership lot nearby. And then they also filmed some stuff at the Sonoma County Community Center, which was thrilled to be part of Scream. But Craven didn't forget. Craven never forgets. And now the Santa Rosa City School District's betrayal and cowardice is immortalized forever in the closing credits of one of the greatest horror movies of all time. And it's also a good reminder that once upon a time, in the mid-90s, Scream was dangerous. It wasn't just the Santa Rosa School District. They went through tons of shit with the MPAA over the rating for this movie. The MPAA wanted to give Scream an NC-17 rating for violence. NC-17. They also went through tons of shit with Bob Weinstein and Dimension Films, this new subsidiary of Miramax that was producing Scream and distributing Scream. They went through tons of shit with Bob Weinstein and Dimension over how they were shooting the movie because Dimension couldn't make sense of the dailies. Scream was dangerous. It was provocative. I remember being in the 8th grade when Scream came out, and once again, was not allowed to get anywhere close to seeing it. But I picked up whatever I could. And my impressions from the marketing, from the word of mouth, my impressions were not, oh, it's this ultra clever meta horror. My impression was that something truly scary and dangerous had just dropped in theaters. It's very similar to what I gleaned about Pulp Fiction 2 years earlier. I couldn't see the thing itself, but the reverberations coming off the thing were dangerous and new and exciting. A year before Scream came out, in 95, this is what Republican presidential candidate Bob Dole said in a speech about the dangers of Hollywood.
A line has been crossed, not just of taste, but of human dignity and decency. It's crossed every time sexual violence is given a catchy tune, when teen suicide is set to an appealing beat, when Hollywood's dream factories turn out nightmares of depravity. You know what I mean. I mean natural-born killers, true romance, films that revel in the mindless violence and loveless sex.
I assume that Bob Dole would consider Scream, which came out a year after this speech, he would consider it a prime example of what he was talking about. Here we go again. This is exactly what I'm talking about. But that's because he's a self-righteous nincompoop with no cinematic literacy. Because Scream actually provides a clever counterpoint to Bob Dole's fear-mongering. In Scream, violence and sex and depravity aren't a perversion of cinema. They are an essential part of the language of cinema. One of the most famous lines in Scream, the line that was Kevin Williamson's guiding light when he was writing the screenplay, is when teenage serial killer Billy Loomis says, "Movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative." It's a great twist on the conservative fear that movies are to blame for whatever, teenage delinquency, teenage violence. Because there's also another argument to be made here, which is that if you are not a psychopath, if you have basic cinematic literacy, if you can look at a screen and realize that not everything you're seeing is necessarily literal or sincere or an endorsement, if you can hold two thoughts in your head at the same time, if you know how to watch movies, then you know that there is nothing indecent about the violence in Scream. There is only the electricity of something new, of something creative, of something innovative. And despite Bob Dole and the Santa Rosa School Board's best efforts, that electricity was tangible in the winter of 1996, even for people like me who couldn't see the movie. It was tangible in December 1996 when Scream came out of nowhere to become the fourth highest grossing horror movie of the 90s, of the decade, and the first installment in a franchise that has now lasted 30 years and counting. So with that in mind, My question for this week's episode is, how did this franchise go from being so transgressive, so dangerous, so innovative, to being so conservative, aesthetically and politically? And I'll explain what I mean by that. How did Scream go from fighting the establishment to representing the establishment? How did this happen? And what influence has that shift had on the movies themselves? All of that and more after the theme song.
The backbone of this country is the independent film critic. The power of movies must be protected. The best thing about movies is the feeling they give. It's a feeling I want to feel every day. Marie Dawg! Marie Dawg! Marie Dawg! Marie Dawg!
This is Movie Dog, the weekly show that digs its teeth into the present, the past, and the future of the movies. I am Brett Boehm, a.k.a. the Georgia Movie Dog, Go Dogs. And if you're enjoying this show, if you're a fellow movie dog, I strongly encourage you to sign up for the Movie Dog Patreon. It's a great place to meet fellow movie dogs, to continue the discussions that get started on this show. It's a great place. It's a great place if you love the movies. And in return for your generous support, you get a weekly bonus episode. A weekly, cared for, curated bonus episode. And speaking of those weekly bonus episodes, I have a very, very exciting announcement, because this week I have not one per usual, not two, but 3 bonus episodes planned for the Patreon. 2 of which, and this is very exciting, 2 of which feature the triumphant return of the one, the only, Joe Cilio, a.k.a. the Philly Movie Freak. That's right, the Freak is back, but only on the Patreon. And if you're already on the Patreon, you're probably saying, well, I have to raise a point of contention, Georgia Movie Dog, because we didn't get any bonus episodes last week. So technically that's only 2 new bonus episodes plus a make good. To which I say, fair, let me explain. The Freak and I are in the process of recording our best of 2025 episodes as we get closer to the Oscars, in advance of the Oscars. And we were supposed to record our episode about the best supporting performances of 2025 last Friday for immediate release. But, and I swear this is true, you can ask the Freak. On Friday in the middle of the day, about an hour before we were supposed to record, the gas company knocked on the door of the Forever Dog studio. And they said, we got to do some work on the pipes on this block, and we have to shut your electricity off for the rest of the day. And we said, over our dead bodies, we got a Patreon episode to record. And they said, it's very important that you do this, and you do not have a choice. And we said, fine. So we didn't get to record last week's bonus episode until late Sunday night, but it did happen. It got recorded, and it's coming to you very soon, early this week. Next couple days, I promise. But that's not all. That's not all. Later this week, the Freak and I will do our episode on the best actors and actresses of 2025. You're not going to want to miss that either. And I'm also going to do, as an added bonus, I really want to do my Scream rankings. I rewatched all the Screams last week in anticipation of Scream 7, and I want to do a best to worst ranking, and I got some hot takes, okay? That's only going to be on the Patreon, though. You got to go to the Patreon to see my Scream rankings later this week, and more importantly, to witness the return of the Freak. It's a big freaking week. A big freaking week on the Patreon, people. A big week. And you can sign up for all the fun at patreon.com/moviedogshow. Patreon.com/moviedogshow. Sign up for a free trial. You don't have to pay right away. You'll love it, I promise. And thank you. Thank you to all the patrons for your generous support. You truly help us to keep doing this show, to keep doing all the bonus content. Weekend at Bergman's is coming back after the Oscars. You help us do that with your generous support. And I thank you for it. And speaking of the money, I haven't asked this for a few weeks, but I'm asking now. Show me the money. And by money, I mean the weekend box office returns, baby. There they are. There they are. Well. Wouldn't you know it? I guess 7's the lucky number because that is the most money a Scream movie has ever made opening weekend at the box office. Paramount's Scream 7 made $64 million domestic, plus another $33 million internationally, for a worldwide opening weekend total of $97 million on a budget of only $45 million. Not bad. Not bad at all. In fact, pretty damn good. And just to say it again, that is the biggest opening weekend in the franchise's history. Honestly, it's not even close. It's the biggest opening by a mile. Scream 6 was the previous leader. It opened with $44 million domestic. And that's a full $20 million less than this Scream 7 domestic opening. This is also the best horror opening ever for Paramount, beating out Paranormal Activity 3, which did $52.5 million domestic opening weekend. It's also the best opening ever for a February horror movie, ahead of 2001's Hannibal, which did $58 million. Not adjusted for inflation. So Scream 7 had a big opening weekend. And this is all despite protests against the movie, against the release of the movie, due to the production company Spyglass Entertainment's decision to not renew the contract of Melissa Barrera, the star of the previous two Screams, Scream 5 and Scream 6, because of posts that Barrera made about the war in Gaza. Barrera reshared some posts on her Instagram account several years back at this point that accused Israel of genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza. According to Spyglass, these posts cross the line into anti-Semitism and hate speech, and that's the reason why Barrera's contract was not renewed. And despite the fact that Barrera then almost immediately posted the following message on her socials: first and foremost, I condemn anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. I condemn hate and prejudice of any kind against any group of people. Every person on this earth, regardless of religion, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status, deserves equal human rights, dignity, and of course, freedom. I believe a group of people are not their leadership and that no governing body should be above criticism. I pray day and night for no more deaths, for no more violence, and for peaceful coexistence. And in response to that, Spyglass said, you're still fired. Because of that, there were calls across social media last week to boycott Scream 7, to not see Scream 7. And in the spirit of that, I'm not going to encourage or urge. Often I say, you got to see us in theaters. Oh, you got to go support the theaters. I'm not going to say that for Scream 7. You can make up your own mind. I saw it so I could do this episode, but I certainly wouldn't pressure, wouldn't even encourage anyone to see Scream 7 in theaters. There were also in-person protests at the Scream premiere and at the Paramount Studios lot. And so, when Scream 7 made $64 million at the domestic box office alone this weekend, I kept seeing some version of this take in the trades. Scream 7 once again proves that internet discourse doesn't matter. I kept seeing some version of that as the big takeaway. And sure, if you are just looking for any opportunity to belittle Free Palestine activism or to pretend that it's just a loud minority or an internet bubble, if you're looking for that talking point, that agenda, the success of Scream 7 on the surface provides you with your best example. And yet, the same day that Scream was released, a new Gallup poll was also released, showing that American sympathies have shifted dramatically over the past year in favor of Palestine after decades of overwhelming support for Israel. Just 3 years ago, 54% of Americans sympathized more with the Israelis compared with 31% for the Palestinians. Now, the support is swung in the opposite direction, with 41% saying their sympathies lie more with Palestine and only 36% saying the same about Israel. So, to all the smug entertainment journalists out there who are rushing to view Scream 7's success as a rejection of the Free Palestine movement or a middle finger to kids on the internet who dare to give a shit about something, I would ask you to consider a slightly more sophisticated reading of the events of this weekend. First, it's not that internet discourse doesn't matter. That's drivel. I mean, it's so objectively untrue as to be unworthy of a rebuttal. Now, do certain extremities of internet discourse, certain schools of internet discourse become tiresome? Of course. But internet discourse in and of itself is not pointless. That's silly. That's ridiculous. What is true, in my opinion, and in the facts, is that social media companies, particularly those owned by Meta, routinely censor, suppress, shadow ban pro-Palestine content and Palestinian voices. There are numerous reports on this. There's a December 2023 study by Human Rights Watch that documented over 1,000 cases of such censorship and uncovered a, quote, consistent pattern of undue removal or suppression of content supporting Palestine, including peaceful expression and just reporting on human rights abuses. So the argument that Scream 7's success was a rejection of the protests against it assumes that enough people were even aware of the protests or the reason for the protests to make a dent at the box office. I don't think that's true. I think the real issue here is not that internet discourse doesn't affect change in the real world. The real issue is that the tech oligarchs who run our society decide who and what becomes the discourse. And outside of small bubbles of progressive cinephiles, I don't think the protests against Scream 7 reached a wide enough audience to make a difference. And I don't think the Melissa Barrera story reached a wide enough audience for people to even understand the reason behind the protests in the first place. In addition to that, I will say that Paramount's marketing team did a hell of a job of creating a counter narrative for what Scream 7 became in the absence of Barrera. The return of Neve Campbell after she was absent from Scream 6. The tagline, "It's all led to this." I think the Paramount marketing team saw the success of Final Destination Bloodlines last year and The Conjuring Last Rites last year, and they said that's the strategy. We will drown out these cries of protest with a sea of franchise nostalgia, leading to a supposed franchise climax. That's the ticket. And sure enough, it paid off. It paid off big time. So, to all the entertainment journalists out there who wrote some form of, ha, fuck you, dumb kids. You're just yapping in the wind, but it don't mean shit when confronted with the mighty force of Scream 7. Touch grass, you losers. To all of you, I would say, A, they did touch grass when they showed up to protest the premiere and they showed up to the Paramount lot. And B, this is not about the ineffectuality of online activism. This is about what kind of online narratives get rewarded by the algorithm. And by the legacy media, for that matter. And which narratives get buried. And even in my little progressive cinephile bubble, I was seeing a lot more about the return of Neve Campbell and the box office numbers than I was seeing about the protests against Melissa Barrera's treatment. And speaking of Paramount and the news, the biggest news out of Hollywood last week was obviously Netflix's shock with quote fingers, decision to back out of the Warner Brothers bid rather than to match Paramount's new extremely high offer. So Paramount, not Netflix, is now on track to purchase Warner Brothers and its subsidiary properties, including CNN and HBO. Now, like everyone on the internet, I certainly have my gut reactions to this, and they're not positive. But I want to let this play out a little bit more before I cover it in depth on the show. For one, because on Friday, after this was announced, apparently David Zaslav was on a company-wide call that got leaked. And he told the employees of Warner Brothers that he didn't think this deal would pass through the regulators. And when it didn't, Warner Brothers would take their guaranteed $7 billion for the deal falling through and then, quote, get back to work. So who the fuck knows what's going to happen with this thing? I also think David Zaslav is a liar, and I think he sold out his employees to sell for a slightly higher bid to Paramount. Because Paramount, unlike Netflix, is going to fire a lot of people because they are buying a business that is redundant to their own. Netflix had no intention to fire anyone. And sure, I'm not saying that Ted Sarandos is trustworthy either, but it wouldn't make sense for Netflix to fire anyone because they were acquiring a business that was not redundant to their own. It was an extension of their own. Paramount, on the other hand, is going to fire a lot of people. So Zaz and the Warner Brothers board just sold out their employees big time. Big time. But that's assuming this fucking deal even goes through. I think it will, though, because you got a motivated buyer with unlimited capital who has a friendly relationship with the White House. I think it goes through, but I want to give it a couple more seconds to fully develop before talking in depth about it and all of its implications. And there are a couple slow movie weeks coming up in March, so there'll be time. But for now, we got a lot more Scream to talk about, baby. And before we get to Scream 7, I want to go back to the beginning. It's often said that Scream revitalized horror when it was released in 1996. The genre was at an all-time low, the genre was dead, and then Scream came along and resurrected its corpse. I've heard this a lot, but just to make sure, I went back and looked at the horror movies that got wide releases each year of the 90s leading up to Scream in 1996. And no surprise, that characterization is essentially correct. Before Scream's release in 1996, the last American horror movie with any sort of sustained legacy or power to it or any lasting cultural impact, in my opinion, is Candyman in 1992. I would also throw in the still underrated Bram Stoker's Dracula, absolute masterpiece from the master, Francis Ford Coppola, which also came out at the end of 1992. But between Candyman and Bram Stoker's Dracula and Scream in 96, there were 3+ years in the mid-90s that were definitely a critical and commercial low point for horror. And specifically, there was just no, when you look at the movies that came out in those years, the horror movies, there's no energy, there's no originality, there's no spirit. The vast majority of the titles are just sequels for franchises that had already peaked. Jason Goes to Hell, Maniac Cop 3, Puppet Master 4, Children of the Corn 3, Puppet Master 5, Halloween 6, Leprechaun 3. And look, I love trashy horror sequels. I love them. I love them. I love VHS horror. But you know what I love more? Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, The Blair Witch Project. I love when a horror movie fucking crushes you. And when you're just getting trashy sequels without the masterpieces, that's when the genre is due for reinvention. But why? Why did horror hit a low point in the mid-90s? The simplistic argument is that horror is a response to national fears and anxieties. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a response in many ways to Watergate. And by extension, in the mid-90s, in America, there just wasn't enough to be afraid of or worried about to inspire a horror masterpiece. Now, I think that's a little oversimplistic because there was plenty in the 90s, as there always is in America, to be afraid of or worried about. Now, maybe the fears and worries were a little more under the radar than they are at other times. But look at the way that Candyman and People Under the Stairs, another Wes Craven film, turned very real fears and anxieties about gentrification and racial inequality into horror. The material was there. It was there. It may have just been a little more under the surface. And I don't think that there was nothing to be afraid of in America in the mid-90s. What I do think is that in general, the general public convinced themselves that there was nothing to be afraid of, or very little to be afraid of anymore. The Soviet Union had collapsed. The Gulf War, which was very unlike the Vietnam War, had come and gone quickly, turning a large percentage of the general public, from my recollection, into hawks. They made trading cards for the Gulf War. As in, I'll trade you a Tomahawk missile for a Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney. Nobody was rushing to make an apocalypse now about the Gulf War. The start of the Clinton administration. Economic recovery, the longest continuous peacetime boom in American history. The explosion of global capitalism, the rise of Silicon Valley and the internet era. There was a feeling in the mid-90s that, to use a phrase that now seems absurd in retrospect, we had reached the, quote, end of history. This was it. The utopia of the mid-90s. This is it. The final stage of human civilization. But if that's true, if horror bottomed out in the mid-90s because we weren't afraid of anything, what changed in 1996 when Scream came out? After all, everything that I just described was still the same, even more so in 96. The economic prosperity and the this and the that. But there's other things I remember about 1996. I remember watching the Olympics on live TV. The Olympics that were happening impossibly, it seemed, in my hometown, in Atlanta. The Olympics in Atlanta. I remember being so excited for the Olympics. And I remember watching live when a bomb went off in Centennial Olympic Park. A bomb that was planted not by Richard Jewell, but by a domestic terrorist named Eric Robert Rudolph, who did not believe in multiculturalism or reproductive rights. He also bombed 2 abortion clinics, or in gay rights. He also bombed a lesbian bar in Atlanta. And before the bomb went off, I remember in my 14-year-old brain thinking of the 1996 Olympics as a version of an end of history moment in my 14-year-old brain. All of these people from all over the world coming to Atlanta, coming to my hometown. And it all seemed so peaceful and so connected. Muhammad Ali lit the Olympic torch. It all seemed so beautiful. So utopian. And so I remember being so fundamentally confused and disturbed by the bombing. Why would you bomb this? You bombed this? Why? So what was 1996 really? It was not the end of history. Columbine was 4 years away. 9/11 was 6 years away. Facebook was less than 10 years away. Trump was 20 years away, which is not a lot of time when you consider where we thought we were as a country in 1996. To get to Trump in 20 years means we were not where we thought we were, because nothing comes out of nowhere. Stuff was brewing under the surface in 1996. There was a reactionary force gaining strength. As early as 1992, 4 years earlier, Pat Buchanan warned the Republican National Convention, there is a religious war going on in our country for the soul of America. It is a cultural war as critical to the kind of nation we will be one day. Sorry, as critical to the kind of nation we will one day be as the Cold War itself. We thought we had reached the end of history? Nope. There was plenty brewing, plenty simmering. And then the millennium flipped the switch, more or less. Because even something as ultimately silly as the Y2K panic, what was that? What was Y2K really? Beyond all the fear-mongering and the televangelists selling jumbo tubs of potato salad for the apocalypse, what was Y2K? What did it mean? Y2K, I think, was the fear that our postmodern world of surface prosperity and supposed enlightenment was about to turn on us in a swift and unforgiving way. That to me was the fear that was at the root of Y2K. And I think in its way, that is the same fear that Scream tapped into in 1996. Not in an obvious, on-the-nose kind of way, but in a more primal way, in a more fundamental way. Because the message of Scream obviously isn't, kids raised on violent movies are going to kill us. That's the conservative superstition that Scream makes fun of and plays with. And in part 3, in Scream 3, you even find out that the original sin of the Scream universe was not a movie in and of itself. It was the rape of Sidney Prescott's mother, Maureen Prescott, at the hands of a Hollywood producer and his powerful associates. That's what unleashed the hell of not just the first Ghostface, but all Ghostfaces to follow. It wasn't the movies, it was the industry. It wasn't entertainment, it was power. And there's something in Scream, something I honestly almost can't put my finger on exactly, but there's something in Scream that predicts the end of the end of history era. We aren't safe. We've just been ignoring the threats. That's the enduring genius of Scream. On the one hand, it satirizes this fear that the movies are going to create psychopaths that are going to kill us. That the movies are going to kill us. It satirizes that as a scapegoat. But it also uses the premise that movies are going to kill us as an analogy for a society on the verge of destroying itself. Scream isn't postmodern, it's post-postmodern. It is one of the first popular works to predict the internal collapse of postmodern society. And even though it's born from movie culture and its references are from movie culture, it's also one of the first movies that predicts internet culture. Because yes, it's about, on the surface, it's about the movies. But more specifically, it's about the meta recontextualization of movies. And as such, it treats movies not as singular mimetic works of art. It treats them as collections of tropes. Tropes that can be shuffled around and parodied and reinvented. It treats movies as collections of memes. What does Tatum say in the first one? If you pause all the right moves at just the right time, you can see Tom Cruise's dick. That's the internet. That's the internet before the internet. But a lot of what I've said, a lot of these sort of big thoughts about Scream only become clear later in hindsight as history develops and takes shape. But these movies weren't ignored and then rediscovered. Oh, this movie that we forgot about was actually very prophetic. No, these movies were massive hits in their lifetime. So what made them so successful in their own time? What made them an immediate cultural phenomenon? I think it wasn't just that the Scream movies were looking to the future, predicting the future, predicting the new fears of a new world. It's also how they looked to the past, how they repurposed classic horror tropes and cinematic methods. And in talking about this, I want to treat Screams 1 through 4 as a group unto themselves. These are the 4 installments that were directed by Wes Craven. And to me, they are not only far and away the best 4 movies in the franchise, they also represent the best 4 installment run of any horror movie franchise in history. You can't find another group of 4 movies in a horror movie franchise that are as good as Screams 1 through 4. I would say the 2 closest competitors would be Nightmare on Elm Street, another Wes Craven franchise, and Friday the 13th. But even those 2, as much as I love them, are a little bit running out of steam when they get to 4. And that's what's so amazing about Scream. Scream 4 is so fresh and so electric. And part of that is the 10-year break between 3 and 4. Screams 1 through 3 came out in pretty quick succession between 96 and 2000. And then Scream 4 doesn't come out till 2011. But that also just makes it that much more impressive to still have the magic 10 years later. So what's the secret? What makes Scream so frickin' good? I've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 reasons why Scream is so frickin' good. Number 1, it's funny, but more importantly, it's scary. When Scream came out in 96, there was a lot of focus, understandably, on its comedic elements, its satirical elements, the Jamie Kennedy character, the fact that he's watching Halloween and screaming at Jamie Lee Curtis to look behind her while Ghostface is sneaking up behind him. And yes, Scream was, of course, revolutionary in its blending of horror and comedy. It's one of the big reasons why it revitalized horror. Because that felt new, that felt innovative, that blending of horror and comedy. It let people back into the horror genre that had grown tired of its tropes through the comedy. But let's not forget how scary Scream is, how visceral the terror is. When Drew Barrymore gets chased down and stabbed in the opening scene of the first Scream, it's scary, it's emotional. And it's not just Drew Barrymore. When characters die in Scream, it matters. You almost can't believe it's happening half the time because these are characters that you care about. No, you're going to kill them? You're killing them. It's happening. They're dead. You killed them? And yes, the murder of Drew Barrymore's character, Casey Becker, was this very clever, intentional misdirect. Drew Barrymore, along with Courtney Cox, was by far the biggest star in the movie at that time. And they marketed Drew Barrymore as one of the faces of the movie. And they killed her off in the first scene as a way of shocking the audience into expecting the unexpected. What are they killed Drew Barrymore? What is this movie capable of? That's really fun, but it also makes the opening scene sound sort of gimmicky. And it's not gimmicky. Because the death of Casey Becker in the opening scene is shocking, not just because it's Drew Barrymore, a big star. It's shocking because we get to know Casey Becker. In a short span of time, we get to know her. She feels real. She feels relatable. She doesn't feel like the kind of character that gets killed off in the first 10 minutes of a horror movie. One of the things that makes Scream so consistently scary throughout the comedy is not jump scares or this or that. It's the character development. These aren't disposable, poorly drawn teenagers being led to the slaughter. These are real people. And when they die, you feel it. The opening of Scream 2 is perhaps even a better example of this than Scream 1, than the famous opening of Scream 1. And yes, look, you can't touch the opening of Scream 1. It's amazing. It's an all-timer. But Scream 2 is up there as well. Scream 2 is one of the best sequences that I've ever seen in a movie. And it's made even better and more impressive by the high bar it had to clear after Scream 1. At the beginning of Scream 2, Jada Pinkett Smith and Omar Epps are going to see the premiere of Stab, the movie within the movie based on the events of Scream 1. And they're talking about the tropes of horror movies. They're also dating, they're in a relationship, and they're talking about the tropes of horror movies, and specifically the way that black people and black actors are either excluded from the horror genre altogether or treated as more disposable than white people. But their conversation isn't just a kind of superficial gloss of the black person dies first trope. It is a masterclass in efficient character development. So much so that when these two characters are killed by Ghostface at the end of the opening scene, at the end of this long opening scene, in the midst of a sea of faceless horror fans who are there to see the premiere of Stab, you feel like you're watching the death of two real people, the only two real people that we've met so far in the movie. And Jada Pinkett Smith's death in particular is so painful to watch, so tragic, that the presentation of her death, covered in blood, collapsing in front of the screen with the music swelling as the reality of her actual death dawns on this audience of horror obsessives. It's an incredible scene. It feels like this sort of majestic and horrible judgment on the genre and on the culture. It's like if Michael Haneke directed a pop horror movie. It's really powerful. It is really, really shockingly powerful. It's remarkable filmmaking, particularly for a sequel that was more or less rushed into production to capitalize on the success of the original. Scream is funny, yes, but more importantly, it's funny and scary. That's the formula. Number 2, what makes Scream so freaking good? Who done it, baby? Who freaking done it? Scream does two things that no other horror franchise that I know of does. New killer each movie, which makes each installment as much a whodunit as a slasher. I don't know of any other franchise that does this. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. Because I think it works amazingly. And yes, I love the consistency of Michael Myers coming back again and again and again, of Jason coming back again and again, of Art the Clown coming back again and again. I love that. But I also love this. I also love not knowing who's under that Ghostface mask every frickin' movie. I love the frickin' Scooby-Doo reveal at the end. It was that person? I love that. What an incredible addition to a horror movie. Because the opening scene, again, to return to it, the opening scene of Scream 1 is so good on so many levels. But an underrated detail that makes it so good is when Drew Barrymore's character, as she's dying, uses her last ounce of strength to remove the ghost face mask. And we don't see what she sees, but we do see this flicker of recognition and a deeper level of fear pass across her face. And that turns it from just a compelling bottle scene into an engine that propels you into the movie. Scream is so good at individual scenes and set pieces and kills, but the engine that pulls us from scene to scene with increasing momentum is the whodunit aspect. Something that Halloween doesn't have, Nightmare on Elm Street doesn't have, Terrifier doesn't have, Friday the 13th doesn't have, after the first one, at least. And that's maybe the best way of putting it. Imagine if Friday the 13th maintained the suspense and surprise of the first installment across an entire franchise, installment after installment. I love it. It works so well. Number 3. What makes Scream so freaking good? Why, it's the casting, of course. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Scream is one of the best casted horror movies of all time. Specifically for how it tapped into and got ahead of the emerging youth TV and movie market of the late 90s. Neve Campbell was just the perfect choice. The perfect choice to anchor the franchise. The strength, the gravity, the pathos that she brings to that performance. Perfect choice to be the protagonist. Taking a chance on basically total newcomers, Matthew Lillard, Rose McGowan. Look, Jamie Kennedy is great in this. He's great in this. Skeet Ulrich was kind of becoming an it boy, but was still pretty unknown, untested as an actor. That's 4 for 4 right there. And then with the bigger name stars, Drew Barrymore and Courtney Cox, using them both against type, against expectation, prevents this from just becoming a star vehicle. Killing off Drew Barrymore, which was her request, by the way. Smart, Drew. Killing Drew Barrymore off in the first scene, rather than having her be the protagonist. Courtney Cox had to convince Wes Craven that she was right for this role. She was Monica from Friends. But she told Wes Craven, "Ooh, baby, let me bring out that bad bitch. I got it. Let me bring it out." And she sure does. Henry Winkler is the principal. Come on. It's one of the best cast in movies of all time. Everyone nails their role. There's no weak link. There's no weak link. Number 4, the final reason why Scream is so freaking good. And this is no slight to Kevin Williamson, whose scripts are amazing and, from what I read, barely altered. But to me, the fourth, the final, the ultimate reason why Scream is so freaking good is Wes Craven. Wes Craven. If these movies have an MVP, and they're very collaborative, but even team sports, especially team sports, have MVPs. And the MVP of Scream is Wes Craven. Wes Craven. There's 100 stories that I read about things that Wes Craven did on the set of Scream to bring out the best performances from his actors, bring out the best elements of the story, find new elements in the act of making the movie, improvise. There's 100 stories. But here's just one. The night before they shot the opening scene, to return to the opening scene again, the night before they shot the opening scene, Wes Craven made 2 decisions without which the scene is not nearly as powerful as it is on screen. Number 1, and again, this is also largely Drew Barrymore, who deserves a lot of credit. Drew Barrymore and Wes Craven are talking the night before, and she's saying how she really wants to bring out the emotion of the moment, the terror of the moment. And we know she does, having seen the scene. And so she tells Wes Craven about this, one of the worst things that she had ever read about. A thing that, whenever she thinks about it, just drives her to such pits of despair and misery and sadness and fear. It was a story of animal cruelty, of a kid, a dark-hearted kid who would set fire to animals. Terrible story. Terrible story. She told Wes this story the night before, and she said, "If I need a little bump to get me there, there's your bump." And Wes said, "Enough said." And Wes Craven, by all accounts, a sweet father figure to many of the younger actors on set. Someone that I read a full book about Scream, like a 300-page book about Scream. I read articles, interviews. I could not find a single bad word said about Wes Craven by anybody. And there was a lot of tumult across the Scream franchise. People will say bad things about people when it's deserved, when it comes to Scream. This is not like protecting Wes. I couldn't find a single bad thing said about Wes Craven. The next day, Drew's about to do this scene, or she's halfway through the scene. She's getting to the part where she realizes she's in big trouble, and she's starting to really freak out and be scared about this voice on the phone. And Wes calls cut, gives her a second. And he comes over to her and he whispers, "I've got my lighter. I'm lighting the lighter." The boy has his lighter. Keep saying this creepy, dastardly shit in her ear, referencing the story she had told him the night before. And then sure enough, she burst into tears. Roll camera. And that's the performance. Now, what I like about this story and what it tells me about Wes Craven as a director is that it was all based on consent and trust between him and Drew Barrymore. If he had just found this story because he knew she was an animal lover and planted it in her dressing room or told it to her without her asking, I don't like that very much. That feels sadistic. And what I always argue is that these directors who say, well, I gotta be sadistic to get the shot. No, you don't. No, you don't. And here's an example. Here's a counterexample. This is dark. This is some tough stuff. But it was done with the consent and trust of both parties aiming towards the same goal. It was done collaboratively. The other choice he made that really made the scene work is the voice actor. The voice actor who plays the voice of Ghostface. Wes Craven had him off screen, off camera, hidden from sight. Drew Barrymore had never seen this person before, had no idea what they look like. But Wes Craven had them do the telephone call live in the scene. And so you're seeing Drew Barrymore experience what the character is experiencing. They pick up the phone. They have no idea who's on the other end. And they just hear this voice, this amazing, amazing voice. And that, plus the dark story of animal cruelty, is what got Drew Barrymore to the place she needed to be to give that performance. And I have to remember this voice actor's name. Oh, I have to remember it before we move on. Roger Jackson, of course, the great Roger Jackson, the voice of Ghostface. That story, along with many others, demonstrates Wes Craven's technique as a director, his genius as a director. And the thing about great directors is they see what other people can't see. I'm getting a lot of mileage out of this opening scene, but it's kind of the microcosm of Scream as a franchise, particularly during the Wes Craven years. After they shot that opening scene, the dailies, as was the routine, the dailies, meaning just sort of all the raw footage, got sent to Dimension Films, producing and distributing. And Dimension Films was a subsidiary of Miramax. It was more closely run by Bob Weinstein, Harvey Weinstein's brother. And the goal was to do more sort of popcorn movies, horror stuff, genre stuff. Miramax is the prestige label, and then Dimension's just going to go out there and make some money with some popcorn flicks. That was the idea. And Scream was one of the first movies that they were distributing and producing. And they get these dailies. And they're seeing Drew Barrymore walk around this house on the phone. And these clueless dorks at Dimension, Bob Weinstein and his crew, they have no idea what they're looking at. What is this? Is this scary? Is this funny? What is this? What the fuck is this? And so Bob Weinstein calls Wes Craven and chews him out right there on set, right there on the phone. He called him an amateur. He called him a hack. He recommended horror movies for Wes Craven to watch so that he could learn how to direct horror movies. Wes Craven! He flew out the Dimension studio head, Cary Granat, to confront Wes Craven in person with a very specific request regarding the mask, which Bob Weinstein also hated. He hated the Ghostface mask. And Granat told Wes Craven and the producers, Wes Craven's producers, that they wanted to shoot multiple versions of the first scene. We want you to shoot about 3 or 4 versions of the first scene with different masks in each version, and then Bob Weinstein will pick his favorite mask, and that's the mask that you'll use for Ghostface. Now, Craven's producers, and again, this is, I think, a testament to Craven's character, his producers immediately came to his defense. Kathy Conrad, one of the producers, reportedly said, if you don't like it, if you don't like the dailies, then shut us down or fuck off. That rocks. That rocks so hard. And Craven, Wes Craven, he came up with an idea for how to get them to shut up and fuck off. He had to show these loudmouth morons at Dimension his actual vision for the first scene. So he got his editor and composer on the line. And they also, like the producers, wanted to do anything they could to help Wes. So they quickly whipped together this edited version of the opening scene with a score and everything. This is not what they would normally do. This lost them some time on the shoot, but they said, all right, I'm going to edit the first scene for you, you fucking morons, so you can see what it's actually going to look like. They showed it to Bob Weinstein, and he reportedly said just one little thing, 2 sentences. He said, what do I know about dailies? Carry on. And Dimension never fucked with them after that. Wes Craven knows how to tell stories cinematically. He knows how to get the most out of actors. He knows how to collaborate with his writer and his crew. He knew how to balance the meta pyrotechnics of Kevin Williamson's script with more classicist horror filmmaking methods. No one has a bad word to say about this guy. And that's why his trust and his vision for the movie became everyone else's trust, everyone else's confidence. Because it was a vision they could take part in, a vision they could participate in and believe in personally, not just vicariously. And that's why I think at the end of the day, Wes Craven is the ultimate reason why Screams 1 through 4 are as good as they are. So what happened after Craven? AC. What happened to the franchise? On the one hand, you could say Scream is bigger than ever. Parts 5, 6, and 7 each became the biggest box office installments in the franchise. So based on money alone, the franchise is at an all-time high. But unfortunately, in my opinion at least, the death of Wes Craven in 2015, RIP, marked the death of Scream. And the franchise has not been able to rediscover what made the first 4 installments so masterful. In 5 and 6, the director and writer duties were taken over by the Radio Silence Horror Collective. That's directors Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillette, and co-writer Guy Busick, who wrote 5 and 6 with James Vanderbilt, who is not in the Radio Silence group, but is in the Project X group. More on that in a second. Now, Radio Silence is the team responsible for such Scream-inspired or Scream-adjacent horror comedy mashups as Ready or Not, which the sequel of which is coming out in a month or so, and Abigail from, was it 2 years ago at this point? And Radio Silence started out making horror comedy shorts on YouTube. They are horror super fans. That's their brand. We are horror super fans. And that is the heart of the problem for me. Because the strength of the first 4 Scream movies is how Craven and Williamson were able to push the premise forward, always forward, finding new ways of blending horror and comedy, new angles to the meta-horror thematics, new storylines that deepened our relationships to the characters. There was this constant sense of daring reinvention in the first 4 Screams. But with Screams 5 and 6, the tone changes. And it wasn't just the Radio Silence team. It was also the new production team. After Harvey Weinstein got arrested and the Weinstein Company filed for bankruptcy, the Scream property, the franchise, ownership of the franchise, changed hands a couple of times, eventually landing with Spyglass Media, who then brought on producer William Sharrock and his company, Project X, of which the co-writer James Vanderbilt is also a part of. This Project X production group, who had produced Ready or Not. So Project X, Radio Silence, they know each other. They're connected. They've worked before. And collectively, they helmed Screams 5 and 6. And when you go back and look at what Chirac was saying about resurrecting the franchise and what the Radio Silence team was saying about their approach to resurrecting the franchise, suddenly no one's talking about inventing anymore. They're just talking about conserving the franchise, preserving. It's a fundamentally conservative vision for Scream. For example, here's what Chirac said about choosing to hire Radio Silence to write and direct the movie. We knew the tone you have to hit to make a Scream movie is such a small bullseye. We went in going, we can't screw this up. So every piece has to be built with a mega fan. Let me say that again. Every piece has to be built with a mega fan. They were mega fans, referring to Radio Silence, and we like working with people we like. Please provide me with any counter examples, but as a general rule, horror mega fans trying to preserve what they liked about a horror franchise is not the recipe for a good horror movie. It is the recipe for a franchise trying to enter its profitable fan service era. But what even is fan service? I'm a fan of Scream, and I feel like 5 and 6 are a betrayal of the franchise. What fans is fan service for? Because suddenly this exhilarating franchise felt safe. It felt predictable in 5 and 6. It was emotionally uninteresting. It had some good kills, some good sequences, but it didn't have that engine to string them all together into a compelling story. And this fall off is most notable in the classic meta monologues, when the cinephile of the friend group breaks down the plot of the Scream movie that you're watching according to horror tropes and predicts who the killer is or could be based on their knowledge of those tropes. It's a classic scene. It's in every Scream movie. In Screams 1 through 4, though, when you hear these monologues, they're thrilling and they're funny because the movie itself is subverting or transcending the tropes being discussed. It's part of the game of the movie. But in 5 and 6, when these monologues happen, it's now this like lame version of self-deprecation because the movies are describing themselves. They're doing the tropes. They're not subverting or transcending them. With that little, what I find annoying, self-deprecating wink. Oh God, meta horror is so played out. So you're played out. You're doing meta horror. Oh God, not another requel. The market is flooded with requels lately. That's what you're doing, though. Scream went from being ahead of the curve to chasing the curve, at best. Or just settling into being behind the curve. It went from being the antidote to exhausted, bloated franchises to being just another exhausted, bloated franchise itself. What made Wes Craven such a great horror director is not that he was singularly obsessed with horror. It's not that he was a horror mega fan. Wes Craven had other interests. Birdwatching, famously. Crossword puzzles. His passion project as a director was Music of the Heart with Meryl Streep. It wasn't Scream. But that variety of interests, that gave him the freedom as a director to use what he liked about the genre, but also to take risks that other horror directors would not take because he wasn't precious about the genre. Wes Craven would never go into a movie with the mindset of, I can't screw this up. The fans will kill me. But Scream didn't just become conservative from a storytelling standpoint. It also became conservative from a political standpoint in a way that feels so deeply at odds with the original spirit of the franchise. And it's not just the firing of Melissa Barrera, who, even though I'm not a fan of 5 and 6, gave her all to those movies, became the new protagonist, became the new Neve Campbell, became the emotional center of the movies, only to be dumped before her character's story arc was about to complete itself because she dared to call a genocide. And who knows what Spyglass's actual political convictions even are. The truth is they're a company that buys and sells other people's original properties and monetizes them. They don't have political convictions beyond wanting to avoid political convictions. They are, as I've argued about the movie industry as a whole, fundamentally conservative in that they don't want to associate themselves with anything that will ruffle feathers or cause a stir, even if it means betraying their lead actor, abandoning their lead actor. And the betrayal doesn't stop with Melissa Barrera. Neve Campbell famously did not come back for part 6, the only Scream movie she's not in, because she was so offended by the contract that they offered her. She said, "Sadly, I won't be making the next Scream film. As a woman, I have had to work extremely hard in my career to establish my value, especially when it comes to Scream. I felt the offer that was presented to me did not equate to the value I have brought to the franchise. It's been a very difficult decision to move on. To all my Scream fans, I love you. You've always been so incredibly supportive to me. I'm forever grateful to you and to what this franchise has given me over the past 25 years. They fucked over Neve Campbell. Even the Radio Silence team. Again, not my favorite, not my favorite directors, but they definitely brought the franchise to new financial heights, if not new artistic heights, which you'd think at least that would matter to Spyglass. Spyglass dumped them after part 6 because in Radio Silence's telling of it, there was like a simple, basic scheduling conflict that could have easily been resolved. But instead of even trying to resolve it, they just fired them. They just dumped them. And their replacement for part 7 was originally Christopher Landon, the director of Happy Death Day, the Happy Death Day movies and Freaky. Someone who, based on those movies, you would think would be familiar with the dynamics of Scream, the sort of meta horror comedy of it all. Landon, however, left the project after Jenna Ortega had dropped out because of scheduling conflicts with Wednesday. He dropped out because his vision for the movie was so closely tied to Jenna Ortega that he just didn't have a good vision for it without her. Now, and this often gets misconstrued, both of these things were before Melissa Barrera got dumped. So he was already off the movie when Melissa Barrera was not given a contract extension by Spyglass. And yet, online, he was considered the face of Melissa Barrera's firing. Not Spyglass, not Project X. Christopher Landon was blamed for it. So much so that people were sending him death threats because they thought he was the one that fired Barrera. Now, did Spyglass or Project X do anything to defend Landon from these unfair accusations or to take responsibility for their actions? Not really. Not that I'm aware of. Not beyond like a little rote press release that only people who read Variety and Deadline even knew about. All of this is so different from the culture that Wes Craven established on these movies and that Wes Craven's team and collaborators established on these movies from installments 1 to installment 4. It's so different, it's shocking. And you can feel it in the movies themselves. You can feel that a spirit and energy has left the franchise. Which brings us to Scream 7. Now, for all the tumult around the Scream franchise in recent years, it's surprising to me that Scream 7 ended up being a reunion of sorts with the return of writer Kevin Williamson as both co-writer and director. He directs Scream 7. And the return of Neve Campbell, who finally got the payday that she deserved from Spyglass. But what about the movie itself? Does it get the franchise back on track? Unfortunately, not even close. No, it does not. In fact, I think this is the worst Scream movie in the franchise so far. And I say so far because it made a boatload of money, as you know, and there will definitely be another one. But why? What went wrong here? Now, I will say, I don't think Scream 7 is the abomination that some people on the internet are making it out to be. It's not an abomination. It's just a tired husk in an old franchise. And it is screaming with every inelegant move that it makes, we're done here. This is over. This should be the last one. With Scream 7, the franchise officially becomes the thing that it originally provided an alternative to. It's neither scary nor particularly funny, has no new ideas. It speaks to no relevant or immediate fears in our culture. It prophesies nothing but its own growing irrelevance. And sure, it's fun to see Ghostface rip off a few kills. But to what end? Gone is the feeling of loss when a character dies. The surprising emotional pull of realizing that, man, I really liked Rose McGowan's character. I really liked Jada Pinkett Smith's character. I really liked Parker Posey's character. It's hard to see them die. Gone is that feeling. Scream 7 is a hodgepodge of limp fan service that was cobbled together by what remains of Kevin Williamson after the production company fired the franchise's new lead because she tweeted that the genocide was a genocide. It's hard to see this movie as anything beyond that. When they reveal the killers at the end, when they pull off the Ghostface masks, I go, oh, right, those two. Okay. The lady that yelled at that baby was 10 times more interesting than Scream 7. Scream 7 was really bad. I give it 1.5 stars. But once again, it's not an abomination. It's the 7th installment in a horror franchise. What do we expect? What did we expect? That idiot John Campea, and if you don't know that name, it's because you make good use of your time. John Campea, who somehow runs the biggest movie news channel on YouTube. John Campea, I know this is just for clicks, but it still pisses me off. He called Scream 7 one of the 4 worst movies he's ever seen. I can't remember what the other 3 were, but he listed them. He says, Scream 7 has now entered my 4 worst movies of all time. John, you moron. The 7th installment of a horror franchise can't be one of the 4 worst movies you've ever seen. It doesn't qualify for that. It's the 7th installment in a horror franchise. It's out of contention. And the question that you need to ask yourself is, why are you so cinematically bankrupt as a thinker and as a critic that you look to long-running franchises for your salvation? We need new Screams, John. We don't need the 7th installment of Scream to be good. Of course it wasn't good. Wes Craven's dead. Of course it's not good. We don't need to be spending this much energy calling Scream 7 one of the worst movies of all time. Shut up. Shut up, get a life. Now, I have already given away that it's at the bottom of my rankings of the Scream movies. But what's at the top? What's in the middle? How does it all shake out? Tune into Patreon later this week for my rankings, best to worst, of the Scream movies. And, more importantly, tune in for not 1 but 2 new episodes featuring the return of the Philly movie Freak, recounting our bests of 2025, starting with supporting performances, and then we'll get into Best Actor, Best Actress. And next week on Movie Dog, oh baby, been waiting for this one for a while. Had it on my fantasy team last year, but it didn't end up coming out last year. It is Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Bride! Exclamation point. Oh baby, The Bride. What's it going to be? We'll find out together next week on Movie Dog. See you there. Bye.